Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. This is episode 3 of my YouTube journey. I hope everybody last Saturday night watched my Tennessee Volunteers beat up on those Florida Gators. Well, not exactly beat up on them, but we did beat them. So that's all that counts, right? This Saturday is the third Saturday of October, which means traditionally it's Tennessee Vols, Alabama Crimson Tide, and we got them at Neyland Stadium. So I appreciate everybody cheering on the Vols with me on Saturday night. So let's get to some cards. Tonight, we are going to talk about the Cracker Jack set. It's absolutely my favorite pre-war set. It is an amazing design. There was 2 years that they were manufactured, 1914, 1915. So the story goes with Cracker Jacks. They were invented in the late 1800s, and it's a mixture of peanuts, as you know, you've eaten it, popcorn, and they covered the popcorn in molasses. When they first started making it, the molasses was too sticky and it was sticking to the peanuts in there, and it was sticking to the packaging, and it was just a big clump of molasses goo. They changed it. They figured out how to make it in like this cement mixer and mixed the popcorn and the molasses first, and then they mixed the peanuts in later, and it worked. Later, they invented a wax box that they could put the product in. It didn't stick to the box. It stayed fresh longer. They could mass produce it. So all that was going on with Cracker Jacks. In I made a note right here. I knew I'd forget this. In 1908, Take Me Out to the Ball Game was penned, and it quickly became a big hit. And of course, it has the line, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I always said Cracker Jacks, but it's Cracker Jack. It's singular. And so the Cracker Jack name became synonymous with baseball. So in 1910, the Cracker Jack company had the great idea of starting to put something in the box to try to draw consumers to buying their product. And at first, they put in like household good coupons, which did not result in any more sales, really. And then they hit the jackpot. In 1912, they put toys in the box. And guess who that really drew to their product? Kids. Just like when I was a kid and the Hostess ding dongs were on the shelf at Kroger's, and I wanted that box so bad because I wanted to cut the baseball cards off of it. Well, it's the same thing back then. In 1914, 1915, those kids knew there were baseball cards in there. So they went from toys to baseball cards and then back to toys. But for those 2 years, they produced one of the most iconic sets ever produced in baseball card history. And the cards are amazing. There are some subtle differences between the 14s and the 15s, including the amount of cards in the set. And I'm going to go over that here in just a second. But it's an iconic design. It has the Cracker Jack script at the top, and it has the player image. And a lot of times the script overlaps the image, kind of like here where the two L's overlap the bat in this Joe Jackson card. Also, they were quite a bit larger. They were 2¼ by 3, almost double the size of the T206 cards. So they were awesome cards. They're bigger. They have a lot of biographical information about the players on the back side. They're numbered, unlike the T206s that aren't numbered. So they're really cool cards. There's a bunch of Hall of Famers in there. The sad thing is, if Babe Ruth would have came along a little earlier, or maybe Cracker Jack would have came along a little later, they could have got Babe Ruth in the set. You know, his iconic rookie card is the 1916 M1014 4 and 5 cards. Just imagine if he would have had a Cracker Jack card, what would have happened there? Most of the cards are very similar from the 14 to the 15 sets. There are more of the 15s than the 14s. And the 14s have all the Hall of Famers are the same though. Another distinct difference is there's two players that are in the 14s that are also in the 15s, but have a different card altogether. Christy Mathewson is the most well-known, and in the 14, he has a landscape card, shows him throwing the ball. It's an action shot. In the 15, it's a portrait card. He's got his hair parted. Looks like it's one of his school pictures or something. And then in the 14, Dale Pratt also has a little bit of an action shot. It's not landscape. And then in the 15, his card is more, it's not a portrait per se because he is in his uniform, and it's kind of, but it's a headshot basically. So those two changed. I'm not sure why. I don't know if anybody knows, but that 14 Christy Mathewson card is the most coveted card of all the Cracker Jacks. It's very rare, and it's the most expensive. The other ones are going to be your Ty Cobb, your Christy Mathewson, obviously, the Joe Jackson, which obviously he's not even a Hall of Famer, but it's a rare card, especially in the 14. You got your Honus Wagners and Walter Johnson. So those are the big ones that you're going to see. I don't think I left any of the big names out, but there is 32 Hall of Famers. Some of them are managers and not players. For example, you got Comiskey in there, which he played as well. Most of them did. You got Connie Mack. You've got John McGraw. So all those guys played as well. And there's other managers, Miller Huggins. So some of those may or may not have made it as a player only, but they definitely made it as a manager. And they're in this set mainly as managers. So you've got the National League, the American League, but you also have the upstart Federal League. Now that league had started right around the time that 14 cards came out. And it's very similar to when the USFL or back when football, when you just had the NFC and the AF or NFL and the AFL came along, and you had a lot of rich owners like Bud Adams in Houston, and I can't remember the guy, but the guy that started the Kansas City Chiefs, and they got together and said, we're going to start a league, and they did it right, and they built stadiums, and they tried to hire the best players and pay these big college stars the most to come play for them. Well, the same thing was going on in baseball during that time. You had the Federal League, was that upstart league. They built stadiums. They were going after big name players. They were offering them more money, and the players, rightfully so, were using that as leverage against their clubs, because a lot of times even the star players had one-year contracts. And because of the reserve clause, they were owned by the team they played for. So if they jumped to the Federal League, a lot of times there was this big fear they were going to be blackballed. And if that Federal League failed, they may not ever play pro baseball again. So it was a real risk. But those players in the Federal League are also in this set. So the set is it's an iconic set. We're going to go over some of my cards. I'm going to show you some of the different things. We'll talk about pop counts. I've even got a raw 1914 and a raw 1915 card. We're going to compare the thicknesses, and I'm going to bring out like a contemporary Topps card and put it up against it so you can see the difference in how thin they are. So stay tuned. We're going to get right to that. We're going to look at some cards. So hang out. All right, welcome back. We're going to look at some cards now. I told you there were some differences between the cards, and I'll go over those here in just a second. But first off, in the 1914 set, there was 144 cards in the set. 1915 had 176 cards. So the 1914 set was 20% smaller. Graded, there is around 8,000 1914 cards graded and 20,000 of the 1915s. So even though the 14's only 20% smaller, is still a significant amount of cards that more that are available in the 15 set. So 14's much more scarce. So there's several reasons for that. One is in 1914, this is a 1914, and this is a raw card. Obviously, it's not graded. And I'm not sure if you can really tell the thin paper stock. It's so thin, and that's why it's brittle, especially as it got older. As anybody's ever seen, like antique paper gets brittle, this stuff got brittle, and so it could just crack off. And a lot of times it looks like a rat ate it, but in reality, it probably just broke off because it was so old. Just in comparison, here's a 1957 Don Larson, and you can see the difference when I put them back to back. The card stock, it's not even close how thin the 14 is. It's like, I would say in holding it, it's like half. And in reference, here's a 1915, and they look the same on the face, right? This is a Home Run Baker. But it is like in my fingers, I can tell the 15 is thicker, not by a whole lot. It's still extremely thin, but the 14 is just unbelievably thin. I mean, like thin, like a dollar bill thin, just barely thicker than a dollar bill. So we'll go over this guy real quick while we're talking about it. This is Fred Luderus, and he played for the Phillies. He is, for you Philly fans out there, he's the first Philadelphia Philly to ever hit a home run in a Phillies World Series game. So that's his claim to fame. Now, here we go on the differences. The 14s, if I flip it over, the writing is right side up, and you can read it. So it's the same way as the face. So this is card number 45. And it has the biographical information. If you'll notice down here on the bottom, I'm going to try to zoom in on this. There we go. This is one of a series of colored pictures of famous ball players and managers. Our first issue is 10 million pictures. Complete set has 144 pictures. And then it says Bruckheimer Brothers and Eckstein, who owned Cracker Jack brand at the time. So compare that to this. Frank Baker, if I flip him over like that, the card's upside down. Now you can see the major molasses stain on the back of that Baker. And this has got some good stains on it as well. But if I flip it over and we read that paragraph and you compare it to the one that I just read, there's a very huge difference there. One is it says different things. The writing's a little smaller, but it doesn't say anything about the 10 million cards. It says this is one of a series of pictures of famous ball players and managers in the American National and Federal Leagues given free with Cracker Jack, the famous popcorn confection. One card in each package. Send 100 Cracker Jack coupons or one coupon and 25 cents to the Chicago office for a complete set of 176 pictures. Handsome album to hold the full set of pictures. Sent postpaid for 50 coupons or one coupon and 10 cents in coin or stamps. So, major difference there. The 14s did not have that about send off for a whole set. And there was nothing in there about getting a fancy album to put the cards in. So that's the difference. And so the 14s, the only way you could get those were in a box of Cracker Jacks. That's it. You had to buy a box in a store, and then you had to open that box, and you had to pull the Cracker Jack card out. The Cracker Jack card was not in a paper wrapper like the toys were when we grew up. They were directly up against the popcorn and the molasses and the nuts. So that's why they're stained. And you can see it. Very rarely will you find a 14 with no stains. And honestly, if you do, I would be thinking someone cleaned that card. I like the stains because it kind of helps tell the story of the era and where that card came from. So that's the biggest difference right there. In the 15s, now this one obviously was in a box because you can see it. But the ones that got sent off for they're clean. I mean, there is no Cracker Jack stains. Those are the ones that are the 7 and the 8s, some 6s, and you don't see any stains on them. Now, sometimes there will be stains on the back, and those can be mistaken for molasses stains when in reality they were glued in that album. So why would they put it upside down, you ask? Well, here's why. If I put this in that album and it came with like a little piece of tape across the top, there was a way to put the card in there. It wasn't really tape. And I wanted to read the back of the card, and I flipped it over and it was hinged on the top, I could read it. If it were a 14 and I had it in there that way and I flipped it over to read it and it was hinged on the top, it'd be upside down. Then I have to flip the entire album over. So that's why they did that. It was really smart. So that's the story behind that. So we've kind of gone over the differences. Now let's talk about the cards. So this Fred Luterus, for example, this is a 14. 61 of these have been graded. And remember, all these pop counts that I give you in these old cards like this can be extremely skewed, because if anybody breaks one of them out and sends it into another grading company or sends it back in to be regraded, then it skews the pop counts. That's with any card, modern or old vintage. We got Home Run Baker right here. He was the first home run king, really, of major leagues. He played on that phenomenal Philadelphia Athletics team of Connie Mack. He played third base. He played third base his entire career and was a great hitter. He led the league in home runs 3 years in a row, and I don't think he ever hit over 12 in a season. So that's what he was in that dead ball era. And the irony is, he ended up playing the end of his career for the Yankees. And he wasn't there Ruth's first year with the Yankees. He had to take a year off. He had some personal things going on. But he was there Ruth's second year, and he got to see, I think it was 21, Ruth hit. I can't remember how many he hit, but it was 50-something, 58, 59, I can't remember exactly. But hit a lot of home runs. Imagine being him and having to watch that. So next card I'm going to show you is this Jimmy Austin card, 1915. Now this is one of the examples of the landscape style, and all of those actually are action photos. They are not the portrait type. So it's an action shot of him fielding. It's pretty cool. He was a third baseman for the Pittsburgh. Now, this is when he played for the Federals, but he played for the Highlanders. And that famous photo, that Charles Conlon photo of Ty Cobb sliding into third and the third baseman flying up in the air, that was him. That was Jimmy Austin. He was a great player. I bought this card because he's one of the feature guys in that book, Glory of Their Times. And if you haven't read that and you're watching this video, pick that up. I've got the paperback copy. I've also got it on audio. Audio tape or audio book is really good because you can actually hear the interview with those guys and hear their story in their words. So that's the Jimmy Austin. I'm not sure what that is right there. That's too dark to be molasses. It's just probably some dirt. So that's that one. The next card is Chick Gandil. Now this is a 1914. So as you can tell, even the landscapes were different. So you can see how they turned it with the PSA label is backwards. And why is that? Because if I flip them both ways, they're backwards. They're upside down. So they're kind of what we just looked at. Oh, by the way, Jimmy Austin in the 14, there's 57 of these cards. In the 1914, in the 1915, there's 114. So most of these pop counts between the 2 years is double, whatever. So Chick Gandil, his claim to fame is he's the dude who came up with the idea for the Black Sox throwing the World Series. So not a great way to be known. He got kicked out. He was not a great guy. He was kind of a worldly guy that he liked to hang out with gamblers and in the pool halls and all that kind of stuff. And he was always looking to make a quick buck. He was one of the main guys. Sakati, the pitcher, was the other one. They got together, and he's the guy who talked Shoeless Joe into joining in to throw the World Series. So that's Chick Gandil's card. The next card, well, let me show you this real quick. I thought this was interesting. This is a Cracker Jack box that I bought from, it's made in the old style, and it's supposed to be a replica of the old Cracker Jack box. And I got this on eBay. I thought it was interesting, but I didn't know it was going to be small. I don't know if the real Cracker Jack boxes back then were this small. I have no idea. I tried to look it up online. I couldn't find it anywhere. But this is kind of just a replica showing you. This isn't a real card, but it comes, you can buy it and tell them which card you want in there. But it shows you it was up against the Cracker Jacks. And anyways, it comes with a couple of cards. A replica Shoeless Joe and this shiny Honus Wagner card. So that's the Honus Wagner. I don't have one of the real ones, but that's what it looks like. The portrait pose he has there. And on the 14 and the 15, it's the same. And it has the back. So this is obviously a replica of the 15s. It's upside down. And the same with this Shoeless Joe replica. It even comes with fake molasses stains. So, but that's how it was entered. Now, I didn't have the paper around it. It would have been right in there in that box, right up against it. And so people would have pulled it out. And you think about it, if you're at a baseball game, are you going to make sure you don't lose that or that card? Are you going to stick it in your pocket? That's why they're in such bad shape. If you got those in a box and you're a kid, I mean, you're probably playing with them. So this one right here is a cool card. This is Smokey Joe Wood. I saw this and just knew I had to have it. I like autographed cards, but I love Cracker Jacks. Smokey Joe Wood is also one of the guys that is in that book I just referenced, The Glory of Their Times. He was like a comet streaking across the sky. He came in with the Boston Red Sox as a teenager, and him and Walter Johnson were the two hardest throwers in the major leagues. And they had this big showdown in Fenway Park early in his career. And Walter Johnson, well, let's see if it says it right here. So Joseph Wood, pitcher of the Boston American League team, is 23 years old. He played with the Hutchinson, Kansas team in 1907, with the Kansas City team in 1908, and was brought from the latter organization by Boston. He was a factor in winning the World Series from the New York Giants in 1912. So in 1912, he was their ace, and he had 2 or 3. I can't remember. I should have done I've read up on him and know a little bit about him, but he was their ace, and he was a stud. He was on a path to being a Hall of Famer, and he was going to be a Walter Johnson. And from all accounts, he tore his rotator cuff or something, and back then they couldn't do anything about it. So if he ever pitched, it was so excruciatingly painful he couldn't do it. He took a couple of years off and rehabbed it and tried to come back, and he couldn't. In fact, the Cleveland Indians hired him, signed him, and hoping he could regain his form, and he just couldn't do it. And so, but he did play outfield, and he hung on for, I think, 6 or 7 years as an outfielder and had a decent career as an outfielder. And then later became a college baseball coach at an Ivy League school. And so he could be close to his children and all that and have more of a steady lifestyle. But this is his autograph. There's not very many autographed Cracker Jack cards at all. He only has 4, and I think a couple of them have been graded twice. So I don't know if that's really right. So at the maximum, it's 4. I think there's only 3 players with autographed Cracker Jack cards in existence. So to have one of those is a pretty big deal. Got a huge stain on it right there in that bottom corner. And also, whoever had this graded, they took the cheap route and just got the autograph authenticated. It doesn't even, it says trading card. I can't stand that. So I want to get it reslabbed. But it's definitely a 1915. It's upside down when you turn it around. And I want to get the autograph, you know, instead of just being authentic. I like to get my autographs graded as well. So that's Smokey Joe Wood. Read up on him if you don't know who he is. It's a pretty interesting story. This one right here, this was the first Cracker Jack I ever bought. 1914, Chief Bender. Very interesting guy. I'm going to do a video on him at some point, but he was a stud pitcher. Him and Eddie Plank for the Philadelphia A's with Connie Mack. He was on the same team as Home Run Baker and was a big game pitcher in the playoffs and World Series for them. Well, actually, they didn't have playoffs back then, but he was a big pitcher in the World Series. One year they won the World Series and he threw 3 complete games. Of course, they threw a lot more innings back then. He was called Chief because he was half American Indian. His mother was an Indian. His father was not. He was a white man, a logger up in Minnesota who met an Indian lady, and they got married and had children. Lived on a reservation when he was young. Got shipped across America and to Philadelphia, of all places, to an Indian school, and came home, ended up going back out to an Indian school again, and went to Carlisle School of Indians, or Carlisle Indian School, I guess it was called, and that's the same school that Jim Thorpe went to. So he is by far the most decorated American Indian pitcher in Major League history, or player, period. There was a couple of different players. Now, of course, it would not be politically correct these days to call a guy Chief just because of his ancestry, but that's what they did. There was also Chief Myers. Of course, there were guys that they were deaf and dumb. They called those guys dummy, and so there wasn't a whole lot of politically correct people back then, obviously. Here we got Sam Crawford, and this is a 1915. He got a huge Cracker Jack stain right there on his belt buckle, and like it is the case, a lot of times it goes all the way through the card. So this one's got some paper loss on the back. You can see it's 15. It's upside down. Sam Crawford is also in the glory of their times. You can see a pattern here. I really like to get those cards of those guys. I enjoyed the book so much. He played in the outfield with Ty Cobb, and they did a really good job playing together in the outfield. And back then, players, there wasn't like a coach in the coaching box giving signals to batters and runners. There was, but players a lot of times did that themselves. Back in those days, in that dead ball era, it was called inside baseball, scientific baseball, and players would decide for themselves whether they were going to hit and run, bunt and run, suicide squeeze, and all that stuff. But Cobb hit in front of Sam Crawford. Sam Crawford was a tall, really fast guy, led the league in triples quite a few times, and he's in the Hall of Fame. And how would you like to hit behind Ty Cobb, one of the most prolific base runners of all time, one of the best hitters in average? He was on base a lot for Sam. So they got along on the field, but off the field, they really didn't. Sam Crawford didn't have a lot of nice things to say about him in that book. And some of the things he remembered, honestly, his memory failed him a little bit, and he was in his 80s when they interviewed him. But he was a really nice man. But yeah, Sam Crawford, Hall of Famer. This is one of my best Cracker Jacks here. It's a 1914 Ty Cobb. It's in a 1 grade. I've looked at this under magnification, and it's got a little tiny tear up there by the R, and it's got a little crease right over there to the right in here. But other than that, I mean, again, as thin as these cards are, You take this in any condition, you can get it. Now, if this was a PSA, it would have the designation MK on it because somebody wrote on the back of it at some point. I guess that's a DIV. I'm not really sure what that is. I've tried to figure it out. It doesn't matter. I don't care. You can have writing on the back. Doesn't bother me. I'm more about the front. If it has a little bit of paper loss on the back, I'm not really that concerned. But classic pose. This is the same pose he has on his one of his American Caramel cards. Also, he has this on the Sepia postcard, and there's the other postcard is slipping my mind right now. So there's 4 cards with this pose on there, and it's a very classic pose. I love the glare, the Ty Cobb glare, and you can see the Cracker Jack stains. I don't have any of the real clean 15s, but all mine have stains. I like them with the stains on it. So that's the Ty Cobb. By the way, the pop count on this is 160 in the 1914s and 220 in the 15s. So pretty scarce card. Again, that pop count's off. There's no telling how many. That was probably in a PSA slab at one time, and they didn't send in the label. Who knows? But then we got this is my last one. It's my Shoeless Joe. I showed that in my first video. It's 1915. It's authentic altered. It's been cut across the top, I'm pretty sure. I don't really know. You can't really see a lot of staining on the front. Down at the bottom in that white border you can. And this is a classic pose as well. The M101 4 and 5. This is the same pose. It's just artistic on the Cracker Jack card. But again, this is the back. It's 15. You can see a few of those stains up at the top. But to me, these Cracker Jack cards are absolutely gorgeous. The red on this one is why. I mean, of course, I wanted this card. This is a card that, you know, if you're a collector, should be one that you want. But the red on this is just, I mean, just glorious. And but you can see how the A and the L's are over the bat. I thought that was really cool how they would do that. But anyways, to me, this set is way before its time. It's got that classic look. It has the Cracker Jack script and all that kind of stuff. So it's just so cool to me. So that's my Cracker Jacks. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Go out and get you some. I mean, they're not cheap. I looked online and on eBay before I did this video, and the cheapest, well, like a card like this, I broke this out of the SGC slab just for this video, but this card right here is just a common. I mean, I'm doubting very many of you guys knew who Luterus was. Oh, Frederick Luterus. But I mean, this card was $450 and it was a SGC 1. So the 14s are pretty expensive, even in the common cards. When I was looking it up, the commons of the 1915s ran just right around $300. So, you know, quite a bit cheaper. But that's my cards. I'm going to cut away and we'll do the conclusion. All right, hope you enjoyed that video. I didn't, you know, if you've collected for a while and you get into a certain set like that, you don't realize that not everybody knows those differences. One of the guys that I watched that really got me into pre-war was Dave Berg, Blue Jacket 66. If you want to learn about the pre-war cards and go down that rabbit hole, go on YouTube, look up Blue Jacket 66, and he'll show you a bunch of those sets, a bunch of iconic players in those sets, and go down in different avenues and show you different things about them. That's what got me started in that. When I first got back into collecting again, I was all about the 50s and the 60s, and the same ones that when I was growing up in the 80s that I dreamed of owning. But, you know, the 50s and the 60 cards, I knew those by heart. I knew what a 1954 Jackie Robinson looked like. It was that yellow card. I knew what a 1956 Mickey Mantle looked like with the landscape design and him, you know, in the background, the action shot of him reaching over the fence, the 54 Hank Aaron, the orange. I mean, all those cards, you know, I knew about those, and I wanted those when I first got back into collecting, and I did. I went on a Hank Aaron run, bought all his cards. But as I went along and I got into the YouTube world and I started watching some of these guys, and everybody has kind of their different niche, and I happened upon Dave Berg's show, and it just kind of blew me away, the stuff I didn't even know was out there. And I thought I knew baseball cards, and I didn't. And it was new, and it was exciting, and it was something that was uncharted territory for me. And so I found myself being drawn to that. And so he was explaining things to me in those videos that I'm sure a lot of old time collectors already knew, and they would have thought, why would you watch that? Well, I didn't know that. And I'm sure a lot of people, I've talked to several collectors who have learned things from guys doing YouTube videos like that. So I don't know, maybe somebody happens on this one tonight and you learn a little bit about the Cracker Jack sets, get you started, and who knows, maybe you end up building a complete set of Cracker Jack cards. That would be an amazing set, by the way. You're talking about a pricey set, but they're going up in value all the time. I don't see the value coming down. You know, what you worry about is in the future, name recognition, something that's going to draw in people that are much younger than me. I'm 55. These 20-year-olds that are used to flashy cards. I think over time, it's a natural progression to like stuff that you're not familiar with because it's new. So people talk about the young kids, they're not going to like the vintage. They've been saying that since I was a young kid. So I didn't watch Mickey Mantle play. I didn't watch Babe Ruth play. I didn't watch Hank Aaron play. But I still like their cards. I think that's going to be the case years from now. Now there's a difference between collectors and these breakers that's basically gambling. I don't want to get into that right now. But even those guys could progress down the road of vintage. And maybe they end up collecting the Cracker Jacks. But my point to that whole story was, you want name recognition. Babe Ruth, everybody knows Babe Ruth. Jackie Robinson, there's Jackie Robinson Day every year. And with what he did culturally in America is even bigger than what he did in the game, even though what he did in the game was huge. So those are two guys I know that will always be collectible, even to the younger generations. I think Cracker Jack is one of those things as far as sets go. I mean, the name Cracker Jack, the fact they were in boxes, they have Cracker Jack stains on them. I mean, all that stuff is so iconic. I don't care if it's 30 years from now. So if you're looking for cards that you know that, I mean, there's nothing guaranteed, but I think they're just going to keep going up in value. That's my opinion. My opinion's not worth anything, but that's just my opinion. So thank you for joining me. I look forward to doing my next video. And until then, have fun in the card collecting world.